A woman boards the overnight train from Prague to Berlin, elegant, composed, carrying only a leather handbag and a small rolling case. 3 rows ahead sits a businessman reviewing spreadsheets on his laptop. Near the dining car, a young backpacker types messages on his phone, normal. Just another evening departure filled with ordinary passengers. Except the woman isn't a consultant traveling for work. 48 hours later, she's arrested at Berlin Hauptbahnhof with classified NATO documents hidden in a false bottom suitcase. No struggle, no drama. German security had been waiting, guided by intelligence so precise they knew which seat she'd occupy and exactly what she carried. This was surveillance perfected. Invisible, methodical, executed across borders. The arrest happened in seconds, coordinated by plainclothes officers who moved through the platform crowd like choreographed dancers. What passengers witnessed was a brief commotion, a woman escorted away, nothing suggesting they'd just seen the culmination of a 3-month operation that spanned 4 countries and revealed the invisible machinery of modern espionage. Irina Volkov wasn't her real name. The passport was one of 19 false identities used over 6 years of operating in the shadows between Moscow, Vienna, and Western European capitals. To Russian military intelligence, she was Swallow, a courier specializing in moving classified materials through conventional transport channels that electronic surveillance couldn't penetrate. To the CIA, she was a priority target whose movements had been tracked for 18 months, building a case that would expose an entire spy network operating across Central Europe. And to the passengers who shared Carriage 7 with her that evening, she was just another professional making the routine journey between Prague and Berlin. What none of them knew was that 3 rows ahead, the businessman wasn't reviewing sales figures. That the backpacker typing messages wasn't planning his next hostel. That beneath Irina's seat, a microscopic tracking device no larger than a grain of rice had been planted during a bathroom stop in Prague's main station. And that every word she spoke into her phone was being captured by directional microphones disguised as ordinary luggage handles. The machinery of surveillance had been set in motion weeks earlier. And by the time the train departed Prague's platform, Irina's arrest was already a mathematical certainty. This is the story of how intelligence agencies transform tracking into science. How patience becomes the architecture of counterintelligence, and how a spy can be monitored across an entire continent while believing she operates in complete security. It's about the invisible war being fought across European railways by operatives whose greatest weapon isn't violence, but the ability to watch without being seen. And it revealed something more sophisticated than any single arrest: the existence of a surveillance network so advanced that privacy itself had become an illusion for anyone marked as a target. Understanding how Irina was tracked requires understanding who she was and why Western intelligence considered her worth 18 months of continuous surveillance. Born in 1985 in Novosibirsk, Siberia. She grew up in a city where winter darkness lasted 20 hours and opportunity seemed equally limited. Her father worked as an engineer at a defense plant. Her mother taught literature at the local university. From childhood, Irina understood that survival required adaptation, learning to navigate the contradictions of post-Soviet Russia where official truth rarely matched lived reality. The 1990s in Russia were a laboratory of chaos. Economic collapse, institutional failure, the daily humiliation of a superpower reduced to scarcity. Irina's family struggled like millions of others, watching their savings evaporate and their future narrow to immediate survival. She learned young that success required observation. You watched more than you spoke. You remembered who held power and who merely pretended. You became what circumstances demanded, shifting identity as easily as changing clothes. These instincts would later define her operational methodology. School records described her as exceptionally disciplined and unerringly observant. While other students pursued obvious ambitions, Irina cultivated something more valuable: the ability to make people comfortable enough to forget she was watching. She excelled in languages, teaching herself English and German through pirated software and bootleg films. By university, she spoke 4 languages fluently and could modify her accent to match nearly any regional variation. Her professors noticed something unusual. She never sought attention, but somehow always knew exactly what was happening in any room she entered. The recruitment happened during her final year at Novosibirsk State University. A professor recommended her for a translation position with a government ministry. The interview took place in an unmarked building in Moscow, conducted by men who asked questions that had nothing to do with language skills. They wanted to know how she handled stress, whether she could maintain cover stories under pressure, if she understood that some work required permanent secrecy. Irina understood perfectly. She had spent her entire life preparing for exactly this kind of opportunity, even if she hadn't known it consciously. Training lasted 14 months at a facility outside Moscow that officially didn't exist. The curriculum covered everything from advanced surveillance detection to the psychology of deception, from encrypted communication protocols to the art of appearing completely ordinary. Instructors evaluated not just skills but psychological resilience. Could she maintain false identities for weeks without slipping? Could she betray trust without emotional complications? Could she walk past a colleague being arrested without breaking stride? Irina passed every test with the same controlled precision that would later define her operational style. What distinguished Irina from other intelligence officers wasn't ideology, but methodology. She wasn't driven by patriotic fervor, but by professional pride and craft. She viewed espionage as a chess game where victory belonged to whoever made fewer mistakes, not who felt more strongly about the outcome. Colleagues described her as meticulous, never rushed, never careless. Her emotions remained locked behind layers of professional distance. She kept detailed notes in a personal cipher, recording every contact, every potential vulnerability, every deviation from established patterns. Her obsession with routine bordered on ritual. She preferred predictable travel schedules, familiar hotels, established communication windows. To her, structure meant safety. Improvisation meant exposure. She rarely socialized, choosing solitude over the risks of personal connection. A handler once noted something that captured her entire worldview. Irina doesn't make friends. She collects data points that occasionally wear human faces. That detachment became her greatest operational asset, allowing her to move through hostile territories for years without forming attachments that could compromise her missions. Within Russian military intelligence circles, Irina rose through demonstrated competence rather than connections. She didn't seek advancement through politics or personality, but through results. When others were caught through careless mistakes, she remained undetected. When others left digital footprints, her communications remained compartmentalized and secure. By 2015, she had become invaluable. The officer who could move sensitive materials across European borders, coordinate information exchanges between disparate networks, and maintain operational security that electronic surveillance struggled to penetrate. Her specialty was courier work, specifically the transport of physical documents that couldn't be digitized without risk. In an era of total electronic surveillance, she recognized that the oldest methods sometimes offered the best security. Paper couldn't be hacked. Face-to-face meetings left no server logs. A trained courier moving through conventional transport channels could defeat billions of dollars in digital intelligence infrastructure. Irina became that courier, traveling European rail networks with documents hidden in false bottom luggage, memorized code phrases, and the practiced calm of someone who understood that confidence itself was camouflage. Western intelligence first identified her during a routine surveillance operation in Vienna in 2016. She appeared in background footage meeting with a known Russian case officer in a cafe near the Hofburg Palace. Facial recognition flagged her passport as suspicious. Too clean, too perfect, belonging to someone who supposedly worked in pharmaceutical sales but had no verifiable employment history. CIA analysts began building her profile, tracking her movements across Austria, Czech Republic, and Germany. Patterns emerged slowly. She traveled primarily by train, always overnight routes. She stayed in mid-range hotels, neither cheap enough to attract attention nor expensive enough to suggest wealth. She met contacts briefly in public spaces, exchanging materials with practiced efficiency that suggested years of training. By 2017, Western intelligence had classified her as an active Russian courier, but lacked evidence sufficient for arrest. They needed to catch her with materials valuable enough to justify diplomatic confrontation with Moscow. The breakthrough came in March 2018 when signals intelligence detected encrypted communications referencing Swallow and a planned document transfer involving NATO classified materials stolen from a compromised source within the Czech Defense Ministry. The intelligence indicated a timeline. Materials would be photographed, transferred to a courier, and moved to Berlin for further relay to Moscow. CIA Station Prague immediately began coordinating with German and Czech intelligence services. The operation's objective shifted from simple surveillance to controlled exposure. They would allow the transfer to proceed, track Irina across the entire route, and arrest her with evidence that would dismantle the network and potentially flip her into cooperation. From that moment, Irina's world became a stage where every movement was watched, every decision anticipated, every choice guided by observers she would never see. The surveillance architecture deployed against Irina represented decades of technological evolution and tradecraft refinement. Modern counterintelligence doesn't rely on single methods, but on layered systems where each component compensates for others' limitations. Human surveillance teams tracked her physical movements, rotating faces to prevent pattern recognition. Electronic monitoring captured her digital footprint, analyzing everything from her phone's metadata to the pattern of her credit card transactions. Technical surveillance devices planted in her hotel rooms recorded conversations and photographed documents. Each layer generated data that analysts in Langley synthesized into comprehensive behavioral profiles. The challenge wasn't gathering information, but managing the overwhelming volume without losing operational clarity. In early April 2018, Irina received instructions through a classified advertisement in a Prague newspaper. The coded message directed her to retrieve materials from a dead-drop location near Wenceslas Square. CIA watchers observed the entire sequence from concealed positions. She approached the location using counter-surveillance techniques. Unexpected turns, sudden stops, reflective surfaces to check for followers. But the surveillance teams anticipated every move, maintaining observation through coordinated rotation and elevated observation posts. She retrieved a small package from behind a loose brick in a medieval wall, pocketed it without examining the contents, and departed using a different route. The package contained photographed documents detailing NATO rapid response protocols for Eastern European deployment. Materials that had been deliberately marked with trace elements allowing tracking through specialized sensors. Irina had just picked up evidence that would justify her arrest, but intelligence services wanted more. They wanted to observe her entire operational protocol, identify all contacts in the chain, and understand the full scope of the network before dismantling it. So they let her continue, watching as she returned to her hotel, prepared for travel, and purchased a ticket for the overnight train to Berlin. Every step she took was anticipated because analysts had already mapped her behavioral patterns through months of observation. She believed in her own tradecraft, trusting techniques that had worked dozens of times before. But those same techniques had become predictable to observers who had studied every previous operation, turning her strengths into vulnerabilities through the accumulated weight of surveillance data. The operation entered its critical phase on April 14, 2018, when Irina boarded the Eurocity train from Prague to Berlin. She selected her usual seat type, window position rear of the carriage, providing visibility while limiting approaches from behind. 3 CIA operatives were already aboard using different covers. Marcus Chin posed as a business consultant, occupying a seat 3 rows ahead where he could monitor her movements without direct eye contact. Sarah Kellerman appeared as a young backpacker, positioned near the dining car where she controlled technical surveillance equipment disguised as charging devices. Thomas Richter operated as a legitimate Deutsche Bahn employee, coordinated through German intelligence liaison, providing internal access and communication relay. None appeared connected to each other. Their movements seemed random, their presence coincidental. But every action was choreographed through encrypted communication devices that appeared as ordinary smartphones and earbuds. The train departed Prague Hauptbahnhof at 22:43, precisely on schedule. Irina settled into her seat, placing her rolling case in the overhead rack and her leather handbag beneath her feet. Inside that handbag sat the photographed NATO documents that would justify her arrest in Berlin. She pulled out a novel, appearing to read while actually performing counter-surveillance. Watching reflections in the window, noting passengers who moved through the carriage, cataloging anyone who looked at her too long or too frequently. What she couldn't detect was the microscopic tracking device that had been planted beneath her seat during a brief bathroom stop in Prague station. The device, no larger than a grain of rice, transmitted location data through burst transmissions lasting microseconds. Even if she had swept for bugs using commercial detection equipment, the device's inactive state between transmissions would render it invisible. At 23:30, Irina moved to the dining car for tea. Chen followed 3 minutes later, maintaining distance while recording her movements through a camera embedded in his laptop bag. She spoke to no one, exhibited no unusual behavior. Just another passenger killing time on a long journey. But surveillance teams noted everything. Which seat she chose, how long she stayed, whether she made eye contact with anyone, whether her body language suggested awareness of observation. Every data point fed into behavioral analysis algorithms that compared her current actions against baseline patterns, flagging any deviation that might indicate she had detected surveillance. The night progressed with the rhythmic monotony of long-distance rail travel. Passengers dozed, read, worked on laptops. The Czech countryside dissolved into darkness outside frost-covered windows. Nothing suggested that molecular-level surveillance was occurring invisibly throughout the carriage. At 1:15, Irina retrieved her phone and sent a brief encrypted message. The transmission was intercepted before it left the train, routed through CIA servers where cryptanalysts worked to decode its contents. The message confirmed her arrival timeline and indicated successful retrieval of materials. Within minutes, Berlin station received notification to prepare arrest teams. But the operation wasn't over. Intelligence services wanted to identify her Berlin contact, the next link in the chain that would lead back to Moscow. So they continued watching, letting her believe her security remained intact while building an invisible cage of surveillance data around her every movement. The train crossed into Germany at 4:22, passing through border controls that flagged her passport electronically but allowed her passage without visible intervention. Irina showed no awareness that she had been marked for arrest, that every German security service at Berlin Hauptbahnhof had been briefed on her description, and that her face had been distributed to facial recognition systems throughout the station. She dozed lightly as dawn broke over Brandenburg, believing she had successfully completed another courier run, trusting in techniques that had worked before, unaware that the invisible observers had evolved faster than her tradecraft could adapt. The arrest at Berlin Hauptbahnhof demonstrated the choreographed precision of modern counterintelligence operations. As the train pulled into the platform at 6:47, surveillance teams were already positioned throughout the station. German federal police in plainclothes occupied key positions. Exits, escalators, taxi stands. CIA operatives monitored from observation posts with direct communication to arrest teams. Facial recognition systems tracked Irina's movement from the moment she stepped onto the platform. She walked with practiced calm, rolling case trailing behind her, leather handbag clutched against her side. Her eyes scanned the crowd reflexively, looking for surveillance indicators. Repeated faces, coordinated movements, anyone paying too much attention. She detected nothing because there was nothing obvious to detect. The surveillance had become environmental, woven into the architecture of the station itself through cameras, sensors, and human observers who had studied her long enough to anticipate her reactions. At 6:53 she approached the station's main exit. That's when Thomas Richter, still in his Deutsche Bahn uniform, gave the signal through a discreet touch to his earpiece. 4 plainclothes officers converged from different angles, moving with practiced efficiency. Irina Volkov? The lead officer used her real name, not the passport alias, immediately signaling that her cover was completely compromised. Her face showed nothing, but her hand tightened fractionally on the handbag. "You're under arrest for espionage activities against the Federal Republic of Germany." She didn't resist, didn't speak. Training had prepared her for this moment. Admit nothing, reveal nothing, wait for diplomatic intervention. Officers secured her bag, found the false bottom within 30 seconds, and extracted the photographed NATO documents. The entire arrest sequence lasted less than 2 minutes. Passengers flowed around the scene, most never realizing they'd witnessed anything unusual. Just another morning at a busy railway station, history happening invisibly among the crowd. Within hours, Irina was in a secure facility undergoing initial interrogation. CIA officers observed through one-way glass, analyzing her responses, noting what she revealed through silence. She maintained operational security perfectly at first, providing only name, date of birth, and request for Russian consular access. But interrogators weren't seeking immediate confession. They were establishing psychological baselines, identifying stress responses, preparing for the long process of potential recruitment. The documents recovered from her bag provided immediate intelligence value, but she represented something more valuable: potential access to Russian intelligence operations throughout Central Europe. The diplomatic aftermath erupted predictably. Moscow demanded her release, claiming harassment of a Russian citizen engaged in legitimate business travel. Berlin presented evidence to NATO allies, classified briefings demonstrating the scope of Russian espionage networks operating across member states. The United States provided supporting intelligence while maintaining official distance, letting German authorities handle the public confrontation. Media coverage portrayed a spy scandal straight from Cold War cinema, but the reality was far more mundane and far more sophisticated. This wasn't dramatic confrontation, but patient bureaucratic warfare fought through legal systems and diplomatic protocols. Behind the scenes, intelligence services used Irina's arrest to pressure Russia through carefully orchestrated leaks and expulsion of diplomatic personnel whose cover had been compromised by information she carried. The operation's true success wasn't the arrest itself, but the intelligence gathered during 18 months of observation. CIA analysts had mapped an entire network: contacts, dead drop locations, communication protocols, and operational patterns. Irina's capture triggered immediate countermeasures by Russian intelligence, but the damage had already been done. Safe houses were burned, officers reassigned, methods compromised. The invisible architecture of espionage that had taken years to build was dismantled in weeks because observers had been patient enough to understand the entire system before disrupting it. For Irina, the arrest marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. She faced decades in German prison unless she cooperated, trading information for reduced sentences. Intelligence officers began the careful process of recruitment, offering not immediate freedom but the possibility of eventual release in exchange for betraying everything she'd once believed was worth protecting. Some operatives break quickly, others never. Irina's response would determine whether she spent the rest of her life in prison or eventually returned to Russia through a prisoner exchange, her career over, her identity permanently compromised. The Berlin operation revealed uncomfortable truths about the world we inhabit. Modern surveillance has reached a level of sophistication where privacy is effectively dead for anyone marked as a target. Intelligence services can track individuals across continents, predict their behavior through pattern analysis, and build cases through accumulated observation that no amount of tradecraft can defeat. The tools deployed against Irina represented billions of dollars in research and development. Facial recognition systems that work in crowds, tracking devices invisible to human eyes, communication interception that operates faster than the speed of transmission. Technology has transformed counterintelligence from reactive investigation to predictive analysis where algorithms can forecast an operative's next move before they've consciously decided it themselves. But technology alone didn't capture Irina. Human patience did. The willingness to watch for months, building comprehensive understanding rather than seeking immediate arrests. The discipline to let operations continue even when evidence justified intervention, trusting that greater intelligence value lay in observation than disruption. This patience reflects a fundamental shift in how intelligence services approach counterespionage in the 21st century. The goal isn't just to catch spies, but to understand entire networks so thoroughly that when action is finally taken, the damage is comprehensive and lasting. For Russia, Irina's arrest represented a strategic setback, but not a surprise. Intelligence services expect losses. Operatives are trained from the beginning that capture is possible, even probable over long careers. The question isn't whether networks will be compromised, but how quickly new ones can be established to replace them. Within months of Irina's arrest, new couriers were operating the same routes, using modified protocols designed to defeat the surveillance methods that caught her. The invisible war continues through endless cycles of innovation and counter-innovation, each side learning from failures and adapting to new realities. For Western intelligence services, the operation demonstrated capabilities while revealing vulnerabilities. Yes, they could track a single operative across borders through months of sustained observation. But that same operation required massive resource allocation. Dozens of personnel, constant coordination across multiple agencies, and technical infrastructure that cost millions to maintain. How many operations could be sustained simultaneously? What happened to targets who recognized surveillance patterns and adapted faster than observers could predict? Victory in one case didn't guarantee success in all cases, only that the game would continue with both sides adjusting their strategies. What emerges from Irina Volkov's story isn't simple triumph or tragedy, but a portrait of modern espionage as a patient, methodical, and ultimately bureaucratic process. The dramatic moments last seconds. The real work happens in months of invisible observation, in analysis rooms where data points become patterns, in coordination meetings where agencies negotiate jurisdiction and share intelligence. Spies aren't caught through dramatic confrontations, but through the accumulated weight of tiny mistakes magnified by surveillance systems designed to notice everything and forget nothing. The train still runs from Prague to Berlin. Passengers occupy the same seats where Irina sat that April night, their journeys untouched by the invisible history that occurred around them. Carriage 7 has carried thousands of travelers since, none aware that they're moving through space where modern espionage demonstrated its most sophisticated form. Patient, invisible, and ultimately inescapable for anyone marked as a target. What does Irina Volkov's arrest reveal about the world we live in? That privacy is conditional, that surveillance has become environmental, that anyone can be tracked anywhere when powerful states decide observation is necessary. That sovereignty means less than technology in an age where borders are porous to data flows and intelligence sharing. That the invisible wars being fought across our cities and transportation networks are far more sophisticated and far more patient than most people imagine. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation into modern surveillance made you see international security differently, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe because we're exposing the operations that happen in plain sight but remain invisible to those not trained to see them. Hit the notification bell. The next story of invisible warfare is already unfolding somewhere, waiting to be revealed.